The letter was still in her pocket when the carriage stopped at the gate. Violet pressed her palm flat against the door and did not move. Through the small window, Ashbourne Manor rose against the November sky. Gray stone, gray clouds, the elms stripped bare and standing like sentinels along the drive. She had not seen it in 4 years. It looked exactly as she remembered, and nothing like home. She climbed down without waiting for the driver's hand. The position she had applied for was lady's companion to Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper's widowed cousin, who had recently come to stay at Ashbourne. The advertisement had been posted in the Halifax Gazette 3 weeks ago. Violet had read it 4 times before she understood it was real. That the house her cousin Edmund had taken from her was advertising for domestic staff. That she could walk back through those doors with a letter of reference she had written herself, signed with a name that was not her name. The name on the letter was Miss Grace Connell. She had practiced it until it stopped feeling like a lie and started feeling like armor. The housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, met her in the entrance hall. A small woman with a sharp face and kind eyes, the kind of person who had seen enough of life to stop being surprised by it. Miss Connell. She looked Violet over, the worn traveling coat, the modest trunk, the hands that were perhaps a little too smooth for a woman who claimed 6 years of service. "You've come a long way." "From Truro," Violet said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced that too. "Mrs. Hargrove is resting. I'll show you to your room, and we'll get you settled before supper." Mrs. Finch turned and moved briskly toward the east staircase. "His Grace is in residence for the month. Lord Ashbourne returned from London 2 weeks ago. You'll keep out of his way when he's working and be invisible when he's entertaining. Those are the 2 rules." "Yes, ma'am. The 3rd rule," Mrs. Finch added, pausing on the landing, "is that no one gossips about the family's business below stairs." "I run a quiet house. I understand completely," Violet said. She followed the housekeeper down a corridor. She had walked 1,000 times, past the watercolor of the Scottish coast her mother had loved, past the door to the library where her father had taught her to read Latin on Sunday afternoons. She kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. She was very good at both by now. Her room was small, tucked under the eaves of the east wing. A single window, a narrow bed, a washstand with a cracked basin. Violet set her trunk at the foot of the bed and sat for a moment in the cold. The letter in her pocket was from a solicitor in Edinburgh. Mr. Callum Brechin, who had been her father's man of affairs and had written to her 6 weeks ago to say he had found something. A codicil to her father's will, he believed, hidden in a set of ledgers that had been transferred to Ashbourne's estate office when Edmund took possession 4 years ago. He had not been able to access the ledgers himself. Edmund had refused all inquiries. If the codicil existed, it changed everything. Her father had intended to leave Ashbourne to Violet outright, bypassing the entail that had allowed Edmund, a 3rd cousin she had met 4 times in her life, to claim the estate on the grounds that a daughter could not inherit. The entail itself was a relic of an older era, and her father, a practical man who loved his daughter and had no patience for tradition that served no one, had found a legal instrument to work around it. Edmund had known about the codicil. Violet believed that with a certainty she could not prove. He had moved quickly after her father's death, installed himself at Ashbourne within the month, and when Violet had presented herself at the door of the house she had grown up in, he had told her, with a smile she still thought about at night, that the estate was his by law, and she was welcome to dispute it in court with whatever funds she had remaining. She had no funds remaining. Edmund had seen to that too. So, the estate office, the ledgers. She had 8 weeks before Mr. Brechin's colleague in London would be traveling to Nova Scotia and willing to examine the codicil in person. 8 weeks to find it, document it, and get word to Edinburgh. It was not much time, but Violet had learned to be efficient with what she was given. She put the solicitor's letter in the false bottom of her trunk and went down to supper. Mrs. Hargrove was 73 years old, nearly deaf in one ear, and deeply suspicious of anyone who had not yet earned her trust. She had a habit of testing new companions by asking questions she already knew the answers to and watching to see what they did when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Violet had grown up around women like her. She found it almost comforting. "You have very good posture for a woman from service, Mrs. Hargrove said on the third evening, without looking up from her needlework. "My mother was particular about it," Violet said. "True enough." A pause. The fire crackled. "You read Latin?" Violet's hand stilled on the book she had been cataloging. "I beg your pardon. I saw you at the library shelf this afternoon. You were reading the spines. Most people skip past the Latin titles. You stopped at the Cicero." "I had a thorough education," Violet said carefully. Mrs. Hargrove looked up then, and her eyes were sharper than her age suggested. "So did I, once. My father believed daughters deserved the same schooling as sons." She returned to her needlework. "I find that rare in a woman, Miss Connell. And useful. I hope you won't waste it." Violet said nothing. She went back to the shelf and did not take the Cicero down, though she very much wanted to. She had been at Ashbourne for 9 days when she first saw the Duke properly. She had seen him at a distance before, crossing the entrance hall, disappearing into the library, riding out before breakfast with his steward. Edmund Harlow, the Duke of Ashbourne, was not what she had expected. She had built an image of him over 4 years of grievance, cold, arbitrary, the kind of man who acts an inheritance with both hands and never thinks about who he has taken it from. He was not young, perhaps 35, with dark hair beginning to gray at the temples and a quality of stillness about him that she associated with men who had learned to listen before they spoke. He walked through his own house, the way people walked through places they were still getting used to, which struck her as strange. She filed it away. The first real conversation happened on a Tuesday morning in the East Corridor, which she had been instructed to avoid between 8 and noon. She had not been avoiding it because Mrs. Hargrove had needed a book from the case at the far end, and Violet had made a calculation. The errand would take 4 minutes, and the Duke had been in his study since 7. He was not in his study. He came around the corner with a sheaf of papers in his hand, and stopped when he saw her, Miss Connell. He had asked Mrs. Finch about the new companion, apparently, because he knew her name without introduction. "Your Grace." She curtsied correctly, not too deep, not too shallow, the curtsy of a woman who knew the form. He was looking at her in a way that made the back of her neck prickle, not rudely, more carefully than she would have liked. "Mrs. Hargrove is well?" "Very well, thank you. She asked me to retrieve a book, of course." He stepped aside. "Please." She moved past him, found the book, A Natural History of Atlantic Birds, which Mrs. Hargrove had been wanting for a week, and turned back to find him still there, watching. "You've been here 9 days, he said. "Yes, Your Grace, and you've been in the East Corridor twice, the library 4 times, and the estate office garden once." He said it mildly, as a fact, not an accusation. "I mention it only because I noticed the house. It's a habit, a beat. I notice who moves through it and how." Violet held the bird book against her chest and looked at him levelly. "I will be more careful to keep to my assigned rooms. That isn't what I said." He looked at her a moment longer. Then he nodded, once, and continued down the corridor with his papers. She walked back to Mrs. Hargrove's sitting room and did not allow herself to hurry. She found the estate office unlocked on a Wednesday afternoon when the steward, Mr. Price, was at the village on business. She had 40 minutes, she estimated, before he returned. The ledgers were in the 3rd cabinet, misfolded behind 2 decades of cattle records, and a set of conveyancing documents from the 1840s. She recognized her father's handwriting on the covers, his slanted, careful hand, the ink faded now to brown. She pulled the relevant years and opened the first one. She was looking for a document folded into the back boards, which was how her father had kept important papers when he did not want to involve the solicitor immediately. She had watched him do it 3 times in her childhood. She was on the second ledger when she heard footsteps in the corridor. She had the ledger back in place and was standing at the east window, studying the kitchen garden with enormous interest by the time the door opened. It was not Mr. Price. The Duke closed the door behind him and looked at her for a long moment. "The kitchen garden," he said, "is in that direction." He pointed to the west window. Violet turned around. "I made an error. You're in the estate office. I was looking for Mrs. Hargrove's correspondence folder. I understood it was kept here." "It is kept in the morning room," he said. "Mrs. Finch would have told you that." She said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. He crossed the room slowly, not toward her but toward the cabinet she had been searching, which he straightened and closed completely. Then he turned to face her. "What are you looking for?" he asked. And the question was not hostile. It was genuinely curious, with a quality she hadn't expected from him, as if he were more interested in the truth than in being right. "I am an employee of your household, Your Grace. I am looking for nothing that isn't my business to find. And yet here you are." "Here I am," she agreed. He studied her. She had the distinct impression that he was very good at this, at waiting for people to fill silence with more than they intended. She had been good at it once, too, before she had learned how much could go wrong from speaking before thinking. "Miss Connell," he said at last, "is that your name?" It was the question she had been afraid of since the moment Mrs. Finch had welcomed her at the door. She kept her breathing even. "It is the name I gave," she said, which was true. The Duke's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, something more careful than that. "I'd like you to come to the library at 6 o'clock, he said. "I have something I'd like to discuss." He held the door open for her. She walked out with the bird book still in her hand and somehow her composure intact. Mrs. Hargrove took one look at Violet when she returned and said, without preamble, "Sit down. You look as though you've been found out." Violet sat. "I'm perfectly fine." "You are the worst liar I have encountered in 30 years of employment." Mrs. Hargrove set down her needlework. "He knows, doesn't he? I don't know what you mean. You are not Grace Connell. I've known that since the 4th day." She said it without heat, as if remarking on the weather. "You have the bearing of a woman who was raised in a house like this, not a woman who served in one." She folded her hands in her lap. "I thought I'd wait and see what you were here to do before I decided whether to care." The room was very quiet. The fire popped. "My name is Violet Ashbourne," Violet said. "My father was the previous Duke." Mrs. Hargrove was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I see. There is a codicil to his will. I believe it's here in this house, in the estate office. If I can find it and document it, I may be able to reclaim my inheritance through proper legal channels." She looked at her hands. "I am not here to cause harm to anyone. I am here to retrieve what is mine." Mrs. Hargrove was quiet for a long time. "My cousin," she said finally, meaning the housekeeper's cousin, the woman who had written the original reference letter before she had fallen ill, and Violet had taken her name and opportunity together, wrote to me about you. Not about you specifically, about the Ashbourne business. She said the solicitor in Edinburgh believed the will had been manipulated. She picked up her needlework again. "I agreed to this scheme. I should tell you that. I knew who you were when you arrived." Violet stared at her. "I am 73 years old," Mrs. Hargrove said calmly. "I have no patience left for injustice now. Tell me what was in the estate office cabinet." She went to the library at 6 o'clock. The Duke was standing at the window with a glass of something untouched in his hand, looking out at the dark and the first snow that had started to fall across the grounds. He turned when she entered. She had made a decision in the 2 hours between the estate office and this moment. It was possibly the worst decision she had made in 4 years, which included the decisions to sell her mother's jewelry, to trust the Halifax solicitor, who had turned out to be in Edmund's pocket, and to travel in February without a proper coat. She would tell him the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. "My name is Violet Ashbourne," she said before he could speak. "My father was George Ashbourne. He died 4 years ago and left this estate, I believe, to me, with a codicil to the entail that was never properly documented before his death. Or rather, it was documented, and then it disappeared." She stood in the center of the library with her hands at her sides. "I came here as Grace Connell to find the ledgers from 1889 and 1890. My father had a practice of keeping important documents folded into the backboards of his records. I believe the codicil is there." The Duke had not moved during this speech. He set his glass down on the desk. "I know who you are," he said. She hadn't expected that. "I beg your pardon? I knew before you arrived, or I suspected." He moved to the desk and opened the second drawer. From it he removed a document, folded, the paper old and brown at the edges. He held it out to her. She crossed the room and took it from his hand. Her fingers were not entirely steady. It was her father's handwriting. The date was October 1889. The language was legal but legible, and she understood within the first paragraph what she was holding. "I found it 2 weeks ago," the Duke said. "When I returned from London, I had the estate accounts audited. There were irregularities going back several years. I found the ledgers in the process. I recognized the name on the document, and I wrote to a solicitor in Edinburgh to inquire." "Mr. Bretchen," Violet said faintly. "Yes, he confirmed who you were and what the document likely meant." He was watching her carefully. "I had not yet determined what to do with the information when you arrived." A pause. "Except that I noticed, once you were here, that you moved through this house the way someone moves through a house they already know." She looked up from the document. "I grew up here," she said. "Yes," he said. "I thought so." She looked back at the codicil. Her father's handwriting, his words, his particular slanting hand. The thing she had been looking for 4 years, sitting in a desk drawer in the library where she had learned to read Latin. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "My possession of this estate was obtained legally, under the terms of the entail as it stood. If this document is valid, and I believe it is, then the entail was superseded before my inheritance was established. Which means my inheritance was not, in fact, legal." He said it without evasion, with a directness she had not expected, and found, against every instinct she had, something close to trustworthy. "I engaged my own solicitor in Halifax this week to examine the question. He believes the process will take some months, but he believes the outcome is not in doubt." She stood very still. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you are prepared to relinquish this estate." "I am telling you that I do not intend to keep something that isn't mine," he said it simply. "Whatever Edmund Harlow did or did not know, I came to this estate in good faith. I cannot hold it in the same faith once I know the terms of it." Violet looked at him for a long moment. She had spent 4 years imagining this man. She had assigned him qualities, greed, indifference, the particular blindness of someone who has never had to think about what others lost for him to gain. She had been wrong, she thought, or at least she had been incomplete. "It will take months," she said. "Yes, and in the meantime," he said, "I imagine you might prefer not to continue as Mrs. Hargrove's companion, although I understand she is quite taken with you." Something moved through Violet's chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. Something lighter than the weight she had been carrying since she had stood at this house's door 4 years ago and been told with a smile that she was no longer welcome. "She knew," Violet said, "from the beginning. She knew who I was." She did. His voice warmed slightly. She told me yesterday afternoon that she had helped you because she'd never met a woman who deserved a library more. He paused. She is not wrong as far as I can determine. Violet looked down at the document in her hands, then up at him. I would like to stay, she said, until the process is complete, if it isn't too irregular. I would like to be here. This is your home, he said. You should be here. Outside, the snow was falling properly now, settling across the grounds and the bare elms and the kitchen garden that faced west, not east. The library was warm. Her father's handwriting was in her hands. Violet Ashbourne stood in the house she had grown up in and breathed for what felt like the first time in 4 years. She was not home yet, but she was close enough to see it from where she stood, and that, for tonight, was enough.